Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel content creator, actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Well, welcome and good evening, wonderful dice of all alignments. I'm Lunar D8, and today we're going to read The Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, and the Shoes that Dance Themselves into Pieces. Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Once upon a time in the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the sky, a queen sat at a window sewing, and the frame of the window was made of black ebony, and whilst she was sewing and looking out of the window at the snow, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow, and the red looked pretty upon the white snow, and she thought to herself, "Would that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame." Soon after that she had a little daughter, who was as white as snow, and as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony, and she was therefore called Little Snow White. And when the child was born, the queen died. After a year had passed, the king took to himself another wife. She was a beautiful woman, but proud and haughty, and she could not bear that anyone else should surpass her beauty. She had a wonderful looking glass, and when she stood in front of it, and looked at herself in it, and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of them all?" And the looking glass answered, "Thou, O queen, art the fairest of all." Then she was satisfied, for she knew that the looking glass spoke the truth. But Snow White was growing up, and grew more and more beautiful. And when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as the day, and more beautiful than the queen herself. And once when the queen asked her looking glass on the wall, "Who in this land is the fairest of them all?" it answered, "Thou art fairer than all who are here, Lady Queen, but more beautiful still is Snow White, as I ween." Then the queen was shocked and turned yellow and green with envy. From that hour, whenever she looked at Snow White, her heart heaved in her breast. She hated the girl so much. And envy and pride grew higher and higher in her heart like a weed, so that she had no peace day or night. She called a huntsman and said, "Take the child away into the forest. I would no longer have her in my sight. Kill her, and bring me back her heart as a token." The huntsman obeyed and took her away. But when he had drawn his knife and was about to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep and said, "Ah, dear huntsman, leave my life. I will run away into the wild forest and never come home again." And as she was so beautiful, the huntsman had pity on her and told her to run away. "The wild beasts soon have devoured you," thought he, and yet it seemed as if the stone had rolled from his heart, since it was no longer needful for him to kill her. And as a young boar just then came out running by, he stabbed it, and cut out its heart and took it to the queen, as proof that the child was dead. The cook had to salt this, and the wicked queen ate it, and thought she had eaten the heart of Snow White. But now the poor child was all alone in the great forest, and so terrified that she looked at every leaf of every tree, and did not know what to do. Then she began to run over sharp stones and through thorns, and the wild beasts ran past her, but did her no harm. She ran as long as her feet would go, until it was almost evening. Then she saw a little cottage, and went into the rest herself. Everything in the cottage was small, but neater and cleaner than can be told. There was a table on which was a white cover, and 7 little plates, on each plate a little spoon. Moreover, there were 7 little knives and forks, and 7 little mugs. Against the wall stood 7 little beds, side by side, and covered with snow-white counterpanes. Little Snow White was so hungry and thirsty that she ate some vegetables and bread from each plate, and drank a drop of wine out of each mug, for she did not wish to take all from one only. Then, as she was so tired, she laid herself down on one of the little beds, but none of them suited her. One was too long, another too short, but at last she found that the 7th one was right, and so she remained in it and said a prayer and went to sleep. When it was quite dark, the owners of the cottage came back. They were 7 dwarves who dug and delved in the mountains for ore. They lit their 7 candles, and it was now light within the cottage. They saw that someone had been there, for everything was not in the same order in which they had left it. The first said, "Who has been sitting in my chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating off of my plate?" The third said, "Who has been taking some of my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been eating my vegetables?" The fifth, "Who has been using my fork?" The sixth, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The seventh, "Who has been drinking out of my mug?" Then the first looked round and saw that there was a little hole on his bed, and he said, "Who has been getting into my bed?" The others came up and called each out, "Somebody has been laying in my bed too." But the seventh, when he looked at his bed, saw little Snow White, who was lying asleep therein. And he called the others, who came running up, and they cried out with some astonishment, and brought their 7 little candles, and let the light fall on little Snow White. "Oh heavens," cried they, "what a lovely child!" And they were so glad that they did not wake her up, but let her sleep in the bed. And the 7th dwarf slept with his companions, 1 hour of each, and so got through the night. When it was morning, little Snow White awoke, and was frightened when she saw the 7 dwarfs. But they were friendly, and asked her what her name was. "My name is Snow White," she answered. "How have you come to our house?" said the dwarves. Then she told them that her stepmother had wished to have her killed, but the huntsman had spared her life, and that she had run for the whole day, until at last she found their dwelling. The dwarfs said, "If you will take care of our house, cook, make beds, wash, sew, and knit, and if you will keep everything neat and clean, you can stay with us, and you shall want for nothing." "Yes," said Snow White, "with all my heart," and she stayed with them. She kept the house in order for them. In the mornings they went to the mountains and looked for copper and gold. In the evenings they came back, and then their supper had to be ready. The girl was alone the whole day. The good dwarfs warned her and said, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon know that you are here. Be sure to not let no one come in." But the queen, believing that she had eaten Snow White's heart, could not think that she was again the first and most beautiful of all, and she went to her looking-glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" And the glass answered, "O queen, thou art fairest of all I see, but over the hill where the 7 dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is so fair as she." Then she was astounded, for she knew that the looking-glass never spoke falsely, and she knew that the huntsman had betrayed her, and that little Snow White was still alive. And so she thought and thought again how she might kill her, for so long as she was not the fairest in the whole land, envy let her have no rest. And when she had at last thought of something to do, she painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler, and no one could have known her. In this disguise she went over the 7 mountains, to the 7 dwarfs, and knocked at the door and cried, "Pretty things to sell, very cheap, very cheap." Little Snow White looked out of the window and called, "Good day, my good woman. What have you to sell?" "Good things, pretty things," she answered. "Stay laces of all colors," and she pulled out one which was worn of bright-colored silk. "I may let the worthy old woman in," thought Snow White, and she unbolted the door and bought the pretty laces. "Child," said the old woman, "what a fright you look. Come, I will lace you properly for once." Snow White had no suspicion, but stood before her and let herself be laced with the new laces. But the old woman laced so quickly and so tightly that Snow White lost her breath and fell down as if dead. "Now I am the most beautiful," said the queen to herself, and ran away. Not long afterwards in the evening the 7 dwarfs came home. But how shocked they were then saw dear little Snow White lying on the ground, and that she was neither stirred nor moved, and seemed to be dead. They lifted her up, and as they saw that she was laced too tightly, they cut the laces, and then she began to breathe a little, and after a while came to life again. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, the old peddler woman was no one else than the wicked queen. "Take care, and let no one come in when we are not with you." But the wicked woman, when she had reached home, went in front of the glass and asked, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" And it answered as before, "O queen, thou art fairest of all I see. But over the hills where the 7 dwarves dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is so fair as she. When she heard that, all her blood rushed to her heart with fear, for she saw plainly that little Snow White was alive again. But now, she said, I will think of something that shall put an end to you. And by the help of witchcraft, which she understood, she made a poisonous comb. Then she disguised herself and took up the shape of another old woman. So she went over to the 7 mountains, to the 7 dwarves, and knocked at the door, and cried good things to sell, cheap, cheap. Little Snow White looked out and said, Go away, I cannot let anyone come in. I suppose you can look, said the old woman, and pulled the poisonous comb out and held it up. It pleased the girl so well that she let herself be beguiled, and opened the door. When they had made a bargain, the old woman said, Now I will comb you properly for once. Poor little Snow White had no suspicion, and let the old woman do as she pleased. But hardly as she put the comb in her hair, then the poison in it took effect, and the girl fell down senseless. You paragon of beauty, said the wicked woman, you are done for now, and she went away. But fortunately it was almost evening when the 7 dwarves came home. When they saw Snow White laying as if dead upon the ground, they at once suspected the stepmother. And they looked and found the poison comb, and scarcely had they taken it out of Snow White's, came to herself, and told them what had happened, and they warned her once more to be upon her guard, and he opened the door to no one. The queen at home went in front of the glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? And then it answered as before, O queen, thou art fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the 7 dwarves dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is so fair as she. When she heard the glass speak thus, she trembled and shook with rage. Snow White shall die, she cried, even if it costs me my life. Thereupon she went into a quite secret, lonely room, where no one ever came, and there she made a very poisonous apple. Outside it looked pretty, white with a red cheek, so that everyone who saw it longed for it. But whoever ate a piece of it must surely die. When the apple was ready, she painted her face, and dressed herself up as a countrywoman. And so she went over the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarves, and she knocked at the door. Snow White put her head out of the window and said, I cannot let anyone in. The 7 dwarves have forbidden me. It is all the same to me, answered the woman. I shall soon get rid of my apples. There, I will give you one. No, said Snow White, I dare not take anything. Are you afraid of poison? Said the old woman. Look, I will cut the apple in 2 pieces. You eat the red cheek, and I will eat the white. The apple was so cunningly made that only the red cheek was poisoned. Snow White longed for the fine apple, and when she saw the woman ate part of it, she could resist no longer. She stretched out her hand and took the poisonous half, but hardly as she bit into her mouth that she fell down dead. Then the queen looked at her with a dreadful look, and laughed out loud, and said, White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony wood, this time the dwarves cannot wake you up again. And when she asked the looking-glass at home, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? It answered at last, O queen, in this land thou art fairest of all. Then her envious heart had rest, so far as an envious heart can have rest. The dwarves, when they came home in the evening, found Snow White laying upon the ground. She breathed no longer and was dead. They lifted her up and looked to see whether they could find anything poisonous, unlaced her, combed her hair, washed her, and water and wine. But it was all of no use. The poor child was dead, and remained dead. They laid her upon a bier, and all 7 of them sat round about it and wept for her, and they wept for 3 days long. Then they were going to bury her, but she still looked as if she were living, and she still had her pretty red cheeks. They said, We could not bury her in the dark ground, and they had a transparent coffin of glass made, so that she could be seen from all sides, and they laid her in it, and wrote her name upon in golden letters, that she was a king's daughter. Then they put the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always stayed by it and watched it. And birds came too and wept for Snow White, first an owl, then a raven, and last a dove. And now Snow White lay a long, long time in that coffin, and she did not change, but looked as if she were asleep. for she was as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. It happened, however, that the king's son came into a forest and went to the dwarf's house to spend the night. He saw the coffin on the mountain, and the beautiful Snow White within, and read what was written upon it in golden letters. Then he said to the dwarves, "Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you want for it." But the dwarfs answered, "We will not part with it for all the gold in the world." Then he said, "Let me have it as a gift, for I cannot live without seeing Snow White. I will honor and prize her as my dearest possession. I'm trying so hard to not make commentary on the story. There have been at least 100 things so far in this fucking story. We're just gonna read the story. We don't need to stop and make comments about everything. But you all know what I'm thinking." As he spoke in this way, the good dwarves took pity upon him, and gave him the coffin. And now the king's son had carried away by his servants on their shoulders, and it happened that stumbled over a tree stump, and with the shock of the poisonous piece of apple which Snow White had bitten off came out of her throat, and before long she opened her eyes, and lifted up the lid of the coffin, and sat up, and was once more alive. "O heavens, where am I?" she cried. The king's son, full of joy, said, "You are with me," and told her what had happened, and said, "I love you more than anything, everything in the whole world. Come with me to my father's palace. You shall be my wife." And Snow White was willing, and went with him, and their wedding was held with great show and splendor. But Snow White's wicked stepmother was also bidden to the feast. When she had arrayed herself in beautiful clothes, she went before the looking-glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" And the glass answered, "O Queen, of all here the fairest art thou, but the young queen is fairer by far, as I trow." Then the wicked woman uttered a curse, and was so wretched, so utterly wretched, that she knew not what to do. At first she would not go to the wedding at all, but she had no peace, and must go see the young queen. And when she went in, she knew Snow White, and she stood still with rage and fear, and could not stir. But iron slippers had already been put upon the fire, and they were brought in with tongs, and set before her. Then she was forced to put on the red-hot shoes, and dance until she dropped down dead. The shoes that were danced to pieces. There was once upon a time a king who had 12 daughters, each one more beautiful than the other. They all slept together in one chamber, in which their beds stood side by side, and every night when they were in there, the king locked the door and bolted it. In the morning, when he unlocked the door, he saw that their shoes were worn out with dancing, and no one could find out how that had come to pass. Then the king caused it to be proclaimed that whosoever could discover where they danced at night should choose one of them for his wife, and be king after his death. But that whosoever came forward and had not discovered it within 3 days and nights should have forfeited his life. It was not long before a king's son presented himself and offered to undertake the enterprise. He was well received, and in the evening was led into a room adjoining the princess's sleeping chambers. His bed was placed there, and he was to observe where they went and danced, and in order that they might do nothing secretly or go to some other place, the door of their room was left open. But the eyelids of the prince grew heavy as lead, and he fell asleep, and when he awoke in the morning, all 12 had been to the dance, for their shoes were standing there with holes in the soles. On the second and third night it fell out just the same, and then his head was struck off without mercy. Many others came after this and undertook the enterprise, but all forfeited their lives. Now it came to pass that a poor soldier, who had a wound and could serve no longer, found himself on the road to the town where the king lived. There he met an old woman who asked him where he was going. "I hardly know myself," answered he, and added in jest, "Ha! I had half a mind to discover where the princesses danced their shoes into holes, and thus become king." "That is not so difficult," said the old woman. "You must not drink the wine which we brought to you at night, and must pretend to be sound asleep." With that she gave him a little cloak, and said, "If you put on that, you will be invisible, and then you can steal after the 12. When the soldier had received his good advice, he went into the thing in earnest, and took heart went to the king, and announced himself as a suitor. He was well received as the others, and royal garments were put upon him. He was conducted that evening at bedtime into the antechamber. As he was about to go to bed, the eldest came and brought him a cup of wine. But he had tied a sponge under his chin, and let the wine run down into it, without drinking a drop. And then he laid down, and when he had lain in a while, he began to snore, as if in the deepest slumber. The 12 princesses heard that, and laughed, and the eldest said he, too, might as well have saved his life. With that, they got up, opened wardrobes, presses, cupboards, and brought out pretty dresses, dressed themselves before the mirrors, sprang about, and rejoiced at the prospect of the dance. Only the youngest said, "I know not how it is that you are very happy, but I feel very strange. Some misfortune is certainly about to befall us." "Thou art a goose, who art always frightened," said the eldest. "Hast thou forgotten how many kings' sons have already come here in vain? I had hardly any need to give the soldier a sleeping draught. In any case, the clown would not have awakened." When they were all ready, they looked carefully at the soldier, but he had his eyes closed and did not move or stir, so they felt themselves quite secure. The eldest then went to her bed and tapped it, and immediately sank into the earth, and one after the other they descended through the opening, and the eldest going first. The soldier, who had watched everything, tarried no longer, put on his little cloak, and went down last with the youngest. Halfway down the steps, he just trod a little on her dress, and she was terrified at that, and cried, "What is that? Who is pulling on my dress?" "Don't be silly," said the eldest. "You have caught it on a nail." Then they went the way down, and when they were at the bottom, they were standing in a wonderful pretty avenue of trees, and all the leaves which were silver and shone and glistened. And the soldier thought, "I must carry a token away with me," and broke off a twig from one of them, which the tree cracked with a loud report. The youngest cried out again, "Something is wrong. Did you hear that crack?" But the eldest said, "It is a gun fired for joy, because we have got rid of our prince so quickly." After that they came into an avenue, where the leaves were of gold, and lastly to a third where there were bright diamonds. He broke off a twig from each, which made such a crack each time that the youngest started back in terror, but the eldest still maintained that they were all salutes. They went on and came to a great lake, whereon stood 12 little boats, and every little boat stood a handsome prince, all of whom were waiting for the 12, and each took them with him. But the soldiers seated himself by the youngest. Then her prince said, "I can't tell why the boat is so much heavier today. I shall have to row with all my strength if I am to get across." "What should cause that?" said the youngest. "But the warm weather. I feel very warm too." On the opposite side of the lake stood a splendid, brightly lit castle, from whence resounded joyous music of trumpets. Okay, I'm really struggling not to comment on things. But no one's noticed the giant fucking castle playing fucking rave music and fucking LED lights and strobe music and fucking Rammstein all fucking night in the middle of the night? Okay, just saying. No, nobody noticed that? Okay. Okay. Gotcha. I mean, heck, we just read Snow White and Seven Dwarves, and, you know, Rammstein's done quite a few. Now, granted, I would recommend Benzene as the first Rammstein video to watch, because I don't want to, like, scare people and suggest, like, Mein Herr's Brent. Benzene, they just drive like a fucking monster truck, fire truck, and it's awesome. Now, there's a song called Sonne, Sonne, and it's about Snow White, but, you know, redone as a Rammstein. Wow, make some good music videos, but that is definitely a very different take on the story of Snow White. So, yeah, there's a music video by Rammstein, Sonne. So, that's a Very different take on the Snow White story. Where was I? Okay, I'm trying to find. Joyous music of trumpets and kettle drums. They rode over there, entered, and each prince danced with the girl he loved. But the soldier danced with them unseen. Apparently, nobody has basic observation skills. And when one, it's like, I'm pretty sure Drax the Destroyer would be just the master of, oh, hey guys, we're going to play this new Assassin's Creed game. Oh, who's this amazing stealthy person that's able to sneak behind everybody? Drax the Destroyer. Why do I want a mod now where you're like any of like the, you know, Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, or Assassin's Creed Rogue, where you just play as Drax the Destroyer? Pretty sure Dave Bautista would be okay with that. He would supply all sorts of new voice acting. It'd just be hilarious. Stop getting distracted. He danced with them unseen, and when one of them had a cup of wine in her hand, he drank it up, so that the cup was empty. When she carried it to her mouth, the youngest was almost alarmed at this, but the eldest always made her be silent. They danced there till 3 o'clock in the morning. How are they not dying of sleep deprivation, says the man with insomnia. But still, if they're sleeping this little, how are they not dead? I mean, caffeine. You guys don't even have caffeine back then. I'm pretty sure coffee isn't a thing you have. Like, you don't have, like, and then they pulled out of the rowboats an entire cooler full of fucking Red Bull. They danced till 3 o'clock in the morning, when all of the shoes were danced into holes. And they were forced to, like, how fucking hard are they being on these shoes? Like, how is it, like, are the shoes just shitty? Are they dance, like, how? It's like, oh, what kind of dance are you doing? Street Fighter moves! Fuck! It's like, oh, what tore this shoe up? Hadouken! They were forced to leave off. The princess rode them back again over the lake, and this time the soldier seated himself beside the eldest. On the shore they took the leave of the princess, and promised to return the following night. When they reached the stairs, the soldier ran out in front, and lay down in his bed, and when the 12 had come up slowly and wearily, he was already snoring so loudly that they could all hear him, and they said, "So far as he is concerned, we are safe." They took off their beautiful dresses, laid them away, put the worn-out shoes under their bed, and lay down. Next morning the soldier was resolved not to speak, but to watch the wonderful goings-on, and again with them. Then everything was done just as it had been done the first time, and each time they danced until their shoes were worn to pieces. But the third time he took a cup away with him as his token. When the hour had arrived for him to give his answer, he took the 3 twigs and the cup and went to the king. But the 12 stood behind the door and listened for what he was going to say. And when the king put the question, "Where have my 12 daughters danced their shoes to pieces in the night?" he answered, "In an underground castle with 12 princes," and related how it had come to pass, and brought out the tokens. The king then summoned the daughters and asked them if the soldier had told the truth. And when they saw that they were betrayed, and that the falsehood would be of no avail, they were obliged to confess all. Thereupon the king asked which of them he would have to wife. He answered, "I am no longer young, so give me the eldest." Then the wedding was celebrated on the self-same day, and the kingdom was promised him after the king's death. But the princes were bewitched for as many days as they had danced nights with the 12. Well, hope everyone out there had a wonderful day. I will try harder in future videos not to make commentary, because I'm just trying to read the story. But, yeah, fuck. Later, guys.